Welcome to In the News for March 7th, 2025. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hello, Brett.
Hello, Jeff. Post Mardi Gras. Hope you had a great
Indeed.
week. Sounds like
it was
I
great.
think you posted, right, that you had some weather, but things still went off and everything is fine. And hopefully downtown is cleaned up after all that. But yeah, it's always good. Well, that wasn't the only thing that happened this past week. Apple snuck in a couple of announcements. There were some new releases, new iPads, new Macs. But it wasn't like a big show, right? They just kind of did some quiet, kind of under the covers press releases. You picked up on this. You had a great post this week, why lawyers will love the new iPad Air. So let's go over quickly all the releases. There were like a MacBook Air that they released with an updated processor, and I think one of the Mac Minis, right? That was sort of on the Mac side that they released. But to us, the more exciting thing was the iPad side here.
Yeah, the Mac side was upgrading the processors for the MacBook Air, which people love to use. So it went from the M2 to the M3, and then it wasn't the Mac Mini they updated. It was the Mac. It was the higher end
Studio.
one.
The Mac Studio.
Exactly.
Right, there it is.
So you can get the M4 all the way up to the M4 Max. Remember, just as a reminder, the M4 chip, which is Apple's top of the line chip, first came out with the iPad Pro last year, which we all thought was interesting because normally Apple would release their highest end chip in a computer, not an iPad, but it actually started in the iPad. But now you can get it in all the computers and stuff too. So that's definitely nice. So you can get, the nice, the MacBook Air with the M4, and you can get the Mac Studio with the M4. Enough about the Mac. For the iPad, however, what's interesting, again, it was also the iPad Air was the big thing, and then the low-end iPad, which we'll get to in a second. On one front, the iPad Air introduction this week wasn't exciting because it's truly just a speed bump. I mean, all they did was go from the M2 processor to the M3 processor. So it's still one level below the M4 that's in the Pro. So that would be one of the reasons to upgrade to a Pro. Although between you and me, Brett, it's hard to find a reason that you would want the M4 versus the M3 for an iPad, unless you're doing certain tasks that are really intensive. One example of them that I'll give is Lit Software has a great app for lawyers called Transcript Pad. And one of the things that it can do is you can import video to it, and you can sync the video to the thing. So while you're looking at a deposition transcript, you can actually, if you click on this line, you can jump right to that part in the video. It uses artificial intelligence or machine learning, whatever you want to call it, to sort of process the video. That's like a super intensive task. And so if you do that a lot, you will absolutely notice a speed increase with an M4 versus an M3 versus an M2 versus an M1. And likewise, if you're doing some video stuff and some photography stuff that's really processor intensive, you'll notice the increase in speed. But for everyday tasks that lawyers and other professionals are going to do, you're looking at web pages. You're modifying a document, you're, looking at pictures, it's always nice to have a faster processor. So that's why, to get back to the iPad Air, I thought the iPad Air was the perfect iPad for so many people, including lawyers and other professionals when it came out, because it's not it's the three bears. Too hot, too cold, or just right. This is the just right iPad. It's powerful. It includes a whole lot of things that you used to have to get the iPad Pro to get, and now they're in the regular iPad, like the thin bezels and the flat sides and the support for the Apple Pencil Pro and stuff like that. It doesn't have, the iPad Pro does have a better screen, so it is prettier, and there's other reasons why the Pro is the premium model for people that really want the top of the line. And I love my iPad Pro, but for most people, the iPad Air is that perfect middle spot. It's you saving a little bit of money, and yet you're getting something really powerful. And so with the upgrade this week, just to make it's all the same features that there used to be in the iPad Pro, but the iPad Air, excuse me, but now it's just a little bit faster for the same amount of money. Sure, why not? That sounds great. That sounds really good. And the one thing that's nice about, I just mentioned that you're not going to really notice the processor, difference that much. But here's one way that you will notice it is iPads, especially. People tend to hold on to them for a long time. I hear about people using iPads 5 years, 10 years, and a really, really long time. And there will be a point where Apple will support some processors for things like, for example, Apple Intelligence and stuff like that, and not some of the older ones. And so there is a really, having the latest processor or a more modern processor is not just good because it's faster today, although that's good. It's also good because you sort of just get a little bit of more of an insurance policy that, 5 years down the road, this is still going to be able to use, the latest, things that we haven't even dreamed of yet, but I'm sure Apple is working on in its labs. So that's why, there's something wrong with the speed bump and it's really nice. But aside from that, I mean, I continue to love the iPad Air. For so many people. It is the one to get. It really, really is good.
Yeah. And you can get it in almost the same two sizes, I believe, as the iPad Pro, right? It comes in
That's an example
now they call
of
it the 11-inch and the 13-inch model. So, depending on which size is going to work the best for you. I know we've talked many times about the fact that both you and I now like the bigger size just because it's so great to have all that screen real estate on there. And it's really cool that you can, once upon a time, the iPad Air only had smaller versions versus the iPad Pro.
Right.
But now it's almost, there's not that much difference even in that today.
That's a huge one. I mean, that used to be the dilemma is years ago, I would tell people, the middle range iPad Air is great, but if you want that big screen, you're going to have to get the Pro model, along with a whole lot of other things that you probably don't need from the Pro model, although they're nice to have. But now like you say, you don't have that dilemma. If you want the bigger model, you can get the iPad Air with the bigger model. And I really like it. If you've got really great eyesight, maybe you won't mind. And I have to admit, whenever I pick up my wife's iPad, which is the more traditional 11-inch size, I'm like, oh, wow, this is so nice and small. And,
So
don't get me wrong. It's nice to have that size, let alone something really small like the old iPad mini. But I've so totally gotten used to the larger size. I don't really think about it when I carry it around. It's not that different in a size from like a laptop computer, right? Just a little bit thinner than a computer. So it's a size that you're still familiar with. But when you're looking at documents and web pages and exhibits and, whatever it is that I'm looking at pictures, movies, just having that larger size, I really like. So personal preference. And if somebody tells me the 11-inch size is perfect, I'm not going to just. It's totally a personal preference, but I really like that bigger size. So
I mean, there's really there's not too many differences here. You do a great job in one sentence here. If you had to decide between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro you already mentioned has a better screen. The iPad Air still has Touch ID versus Face ID. Is that correct? The
iPad Air has Touch ID. Yeah, I think it's in the button. That's exactly. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
So if you want, but again, that's not a huge. I mean, it's nice. But I can log into things like 1Password just by staring at my screen and not reaching up and touching a button. But on the other hand, some people like touching a button. If you happen to be wearing a mask or something like that, maybe it's nicer to have a button. So there you could make an argument either way. It's a little bit of a pain to have to reach up and touch it. But I mean, the main reason I like the Pro is because it's got the bigger screen. The better screen. It's just it's a richer color. It's nicer. Yes. It's got the slightly faster processor. It's got all of those things that make it just creature comforts. It's a nicer device to use. And if you use it really extensively, like I do, I do prefer it. But again, you have to be a big iPad user to really appreciate the difference of what is it, a couple $100 more, $200 more.
And you also mentioned here that there's a new Magic Keyboard for the iPad Air. Thinking about this just real quick, I think it was about a year ago, maybe just over a year ago, I did get a brand new iPad Air for my wife. That's pretty much all the computer that she uses. And I did get her that Magic Keyboard for there, and she loves that. She does use the Touch ID, and I just get a little frustrated sometimes because I have to remember that when I sit down in front of her iPad that I have to put my finger on the little button there as opposed to my iPad, which has Face ID. But, for her, it's great. Like, it's not that big of a deal. She's used to it, and it's just, muscle memory. But the new Magic Keyboard, let's see, it just added a little bit of components here. I think a new function key row at the top right, a larger trackpad. I mean, like I said, the iPad Air for my wife is pretty much the only computer that she uses for everything. And, to your point about just being able to use this, I mean, it just makes it a little more functional in that it can pretty much be that computer if that's, sort of your workflow. I mean, she's not in a professional setting necessarily, so which would require maybe a little bit more horsepower. But for her, it does everything that she needs.
I mentioned before that the Air, well, it's one of the things I like about it is Apple takes some of these great features on the Pro and then pushes them down to the Air.
Right.
And the keyboard's a good example of it. I don't use the keyboard for reasons I talked about in the past, but if you do want to have a keyboard with you all the time, the Magic Keyboard is great. It used to be that to have a keyboard with an iPad, it was sort of a traditional L shape. with the screen and the keyboard. And then Apple with the Magic Keyboard for the iPads came up with, there's a word they use, cantilever, am I saying it right? But it basically means that the screen sort of like, you can see it totally on the picture that you're showing right now, that the screen sort of comes out a little bit and floats a little bit above the keyboard. And that sort of gives them a little bit more space, some nicer angles. And one of the things that Apple did last year is they introduced a version of the Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro that, because of this design, was able to support the function keys at the top. And, you know, when you're using your keyboard, I mean, we all know from using computers that a function key row is probably not something you use all the time, but it's nice. It's nice to have easy access to those little things. And so now Apple has taken that same function row and brought it to a keyboard for the Air. Now, to be clear, this is not the exact same keyboard that you can get with the iPad Pro. It's a tiny bit cheaper than the Magic Keyboard for the Pro.
Right.
And it lacks, for example, the haptics on the trackpad, which is sort of nice because you can sort of quote unquote feel, you know, when you're touching something. And then it lacks the backlit keys, which is, again, something that people know from laptop computers. Backlit keys can be really, really nice. And the higher end one uses sort of aluminum as opposed to the more plasticky silicone type substance here. But again, there's not major differences. So it's not quite the keyboard that you get with the iPad that you can purchase for the iPad Pro, but it's better than it used to be. So it's another example of Apple's taking some of those features and pushing them down to the mainstream line. So so it's really, really nice.
That's not the only iPad that Apple introduced. Some people call this the child pad, the iPad nothing, the iPad that's just an iPad. There's no other thing. This is like sort of the entry level iPad, but they did bump it up a little bit with a little bit of a newer processor, nowhere near the processor that we're talking about with the M3, the M4, but instead it's the A16. But hey, for some people, I don't think professionals, true to your post that you had today, that this would be the right iPad, but it is available out there. And again, the reason I say child pad is because most people think of it as it's like an iPad that you would get maybe for the kids.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't have some of the design features I talked about. The bezel is going to be a little bit bigger than the iPad, you know, Air and the iPad Pro. The processor is a little bit slower, although this new version is not a bad processor. It's the one that was in the iPhone. I want to say it was 14 or something like that. It's not as fast as the M3, but it's you know, it's something. It's you know, it's a nice little basic intro iPad. I think that the biggest thing to say, and you say for kids, and that's definitely true because of the price, but for anyone, this is, if you want to get, you know, we all know that the iPad and the iPhone are very similar to each other. You know, some apps can run in the both and all that sort of stuff. The cheapest way that you can get into an iPad/iPhone with a new device is this $350 device. You know, there's no phone there's no modern phone that you can get for $350. This is it. So this is a great price. In fact, it's even a little bit cheaper if you're a school and you get the educational price, or if you're a student in a school and you can get the educational price. So this is, you know, this is really, really inexpensive. And, you know, I do, you know, although I don't recommend this one for lawyers that come talk to me, you know, every once in a while, someone will say, Jeff, I just want the most basic thing. I'm just going to read my email, maybe look at some web pages. You know, I don't plan to be working with a lot of exhibits or anything like, I just want something really basic. Then I'm like, well, you know, that's what this is. You can't get the bigger version. You can't get the 13-inch. You can't get a lot of the advanced features, but the price might be, I mean, if you really don't think you're going to use an iPad very often, or like you say, you want to give something to your kids, so you don't want to spend a lot. You know, there are absolutely, you know, uses where this is a nice thing. And now that the processor has been bumped up again, speed bumps from this, you know, week, it's better. Now, to be clear, this processor, even though it's a better processor than before, the A16 does not support Apple Intelligence. And this is an example of what I was talking about, that, you know, you want to have a later processor. And what's interesting to me is ever since Apple first announced Apple Intelligence, you know, they have everything that they've come out with has supported it. It's like across the line. If they come out with a new product, it supports Apple Intelligence. This is the first new Apple product since Apple Intelligence was announced that doesn't support Apple Intelligence, just because the A16 can't quite handle it. So this is an example. Now, as you and I are talking today, I personally don't think, you know, most of the Apple Intelligence features that you can use right now, March 2025, are not a big deal. But I really do think and maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I really do think that it's going to be a big deal soon. I mean, in so many areas, we are seeing how AI is really transformative. So I think it's going to be a big deal in the next year, 2, 3. And this iPad today, so today you can't use it with Apple Intelligence, no big deal. But 2 years from now, that might be a bigger deal. And so it's just another example of why I really recommend that if you can afford it, that you get that iPad Air. I think it's a much better device. It's going to have much longer. But if you truly don't care, you really just want the basic level, money is more important than longevity. That's what the iPad A16, as it's now called.
So interesting.
Yeah.
That blows a hole in my whole prognostication, Jeff, that like Apple was really pushing everything into Apple Intelligence. I mean, that's one of the things we discussed so much about the 16E, the iPhone 16E,
right?
Is that it's a little higher in price because even though it's the quote entry line iPhone, the entry level iPhone, but it still supports Apple Intelligence. I am befuddled that Apple released a new device that does not support Apple Intelligence. I totally agree with all of your comments right now. It's not that big of a deal as it stands today, as we're recording on March 7th, 2025. But it's like, why, if you're putting all those eggs in that AI basket, why would you not at least support that? I mean, I'm sure there's pricing reasons and everything, but wow,
that's
that
the
just
reason.
blows me away. Interesting.
Yeah, that's the reason.
Well, okay, good on the iPad. Let's move on. In fact, let's talk just quickly about the iPhone 16e because we've already covered that the last 2 or 3 shows, I know. But this was a really interesting comment article that you linked to, mainly because we've been talking about all the things maybe that were not in the 16e that people did want with some of the wireless charging and some of not as many cameras. But this in 9 to 5 Mac from Michael Burkhardt, it looks like 5 notable iPhone 16e upgrades that you might have missed. I thought this was really interesting, including for me, the biggest one that stood out was this satellite connectivity. Like it's actually in the 16e. Hopefully you don't have to use it because it's one of these emergency situations, but at least it's there.
Yeah. When we talked about the 16e last week and even the week before, we predicted it. A lot of what we were talking about was, you have the iPhone 16 and this is the 16e, which is a little below it. So here's what you're missing from the 16. But the reality of is, and what this article does a good job of reminding us of is, a lot of people are not just comparing the 16 and the 16e. What a lot of people are doing is they're saying, I currently use an iPhone SE and I want to upgrade to the new SE. And of course, there is no SE, but this is the spiritual, successor to it. And so if you had an SE 3rd generation, which I think was the most recent, or certainly if you had one that was even older, what are the new things you're going to get with the 16e? And you're going to get a lot of new things that are modern. You get a bigger device, which you can argue might be bigger, better, or smaller, or good or bad. Some people prefer it's a little bit easier to hold in your hand with a smaller SE. So a slightly bigger device, you get a much bigger screen because the button's not on it. So you get more screen space. And of course, without the button, you get Face ID, you get that new action button on the side, you get the faster processor, you get Apple Intelligence support, which the SE couldn't do. You get the a much, much, much better camera. I think it's 48 megapixels as opposed to 12. So that's a huge increase. You get USB-C instead of Lightning, which is consistent. So there's a lot of things that you get with that upgrading for the SE. But this article does a good job of saying, here's some of the smaller features that aren't, perhaps, the big marquee things, but a lot of them have to do with just, you're probably not going to use them daily. But as you just said, Brett, if you, in those emergency situations when you need them, you'll be so happy to have them. Satellite connectivity, obviously the SOS thing, if you're totally off-road and you get into an accident, you can call for help. But it's not just that. I mean, even if you're just camping in the woods and don't have cellular, you could use the messages via satellite. So if you just wanted to text message somebody and say, we're going to stay an extra day, here when we're camping, you could do that, with the satellite and with the messages. And that's really, really nice. Crash detection, another one. We all hope that we never need this to happen, but you're driving in your car, you get into a car accident. This iPhone 16e, unlike the SE, it is going to recognize that you are in a crash, and it's going to do it. This article, the next one that's mentioned in the article, the way that he phrases it, I think is interesting. It's water resistance, and he says it's IP68, which is the standard. And he goes, it means that you can use your iPhone underwater for up to 6 meters for 30 minutes or less. Don't do this, people. This is not a
Yeah,
feature.
not
Nobody is
necessary.
telling you to take the iPhone swimming when you're in the Gulf of whatever you want to call it nowadays. But if you do happen to get it wet, because it's IP68 as opposed to IP67, it's going to be able to take a licking and keep on ticking a little bit better.
Right.
So
Right.
when you read this paragraph, you're like, oh, wow, I can suddenly use this iPhone when I go swimming. No, 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 no.
No,
Do not do that. People have done it in
right.
the past. It will work for a little bit, but you don't want to do that with an iPhone. But
Don't
hey,
test
if
it.
you accidentally drop it in the sink, in goodness forbid, the toilet or wherever else, you have a better
You'll be
chance of
okay.
being okay because of the water resistance. And then there's some other little things he talks about too, like the optical, thing and the night photography. So these are all
Yeah.
relatively minor things. You may never need any of these features, but if you happen to be in
Good
the middle of
article.
nowhere and you drop your iPhone in a lake, you're in better shape with the 60 than you were with the SE.
If you are planning to get your kid one of those new iPad nothings, the child pads without Apple Intelligence, good article from John Gruber at Daring Fireball that apparently Apple had a press release this week about detailing some of their changes that they're making to child accounts. Now, if you have been in a family like Jeff and I have, you have gone through this whole exercise of having overseen multiple family accounts. I know we did this, and I remember setting up child accounts for, Apple accounts is what I'm talking about, or iCloud accounts for my kids, and up to a certain age, like they would only have they would have restrictions on what they could do with their devices, and they would have to ask for, permission to purchase an app or that kind of a thing. And there's a lot of customization that can go on in there, but I found it to be pretty good. And once they get over a certain age, then you can give them more freedom, that kind of a thing. We even use some of the screen time aspects. I think John mentions that down here that, don't always work the greatest, and sometimes they don't. I think one year I remember my son found a way to work around. I think he guessed one of our passcodes or something. So, you can't really protect against that. But I'm glad to hear this. John is quoting Dan Morin over at Six Colors and talking about helping protect kids online. That was the title of this post from Apple. I'm glad to see that Apple is continuing to invest in this and maybe make some improvements on this aspect.
Yeah. To be fair, Brett, this is, I mean, Apple may have done this anyway, but I think that this is a response to a regulation.
Yeah,
There
I
have
get
been
that
some
too. Yeah,
states like Texas and Oklahoma and some countries that, the issue is, and it could be a hot button issue, we don't want our kids exposed to something inappropriate. So many kids have iPhones and Android phones and stuff like that nowadays.
sure.
So what can we, let's protect the kids. Obviously, that's something that's hard to argue against, protecting the kids. One of the things that regulations are starting to, in fact, the Oklahoma one may have been passed this week or close to passing, but it's they want to say, it's not just parents that are responsible for what their kids access, but the people that make devices should have some responsibility too. And so one
Yeah.
of the things that Apple is doing with this tweak is Apple currently knows how old a user is. When you set up a guest account, I mean, a child account, excuse me, you put the age of your child. So Apple knows
Correct.
exactly
Their
how old the child
birthday.
is.
Right.
But let's just say that child, for example, downloads the Facebook app, with your approval, if you have Apple approval. There, of course, may be some things on Facebook that are, not necessarily appropriate for someone that's a preteen or something like that. But app developers currently have no idea how old the user is. And so one of these changes that Apple describes here and that's described in this post is Apple, I don't think it's the specific age, but I think it's the age range. So I'm guessing it's something like, under 13, under 10, preteen, teenager. And so Apple will, in fact, you just highlighted it. It's an age range of the user. So what happens if the parent says yes, then the app can say, this user is between the age of, and I'm just guessing, 10 to 13 or something like that. And now then the onus falls on the app developer. What are they going to do in their app that, knowing that the user is between these ages, what are they going to restrict in the app? What privacy things are they going to have? That sort of stuff. So to a certain degree, you could argue it's Apple passing the buck because ultimately it's the developer, Facebook or whoever else that's going to be responsible. But the problem is that, not the problem, but the current situation, the app developer couldn't do anything because they just don't know. And so now they'll be able to have that information. And again, though, they're not giving them this precise age because you still want to have some privacy. So, I mean, I think that on the one hand, this is prompted by regulation. So it's not like Apple is doing this out of the goodness of their heart. On the other hand, I think it's probably a good move. I always worry about regulation and technology things because legislators are often so far behind the bleeding edge and stuff like that.
Right.
I still have
Right.
mixed emotions about Europe saying that you have to use USB-C because USB-C is great. I love USB-C, but who's gonna develop the next standard, something even better than USB-C, because they know they can't sell it in Europe, and so we're probably stuck with USB-C forever. Whereas in a
Right.
total free market, maybe we'd have something better. So I have mixed emotions about all this. I'm not a huge libertarian, but on some things I am. So whatever. That's what's going on. That's why Apple's doing this change, and that's what's happening.
I will say Apple, kind of just going back to some of my comments. I mean, I feel for parents because I had to do this, and I know you had to do some of this when you
Hmm.
have young kids, just going through all of the rigmarole of trying to understand all of the customized options. I mean, here, for example, you'd have to opt in to say, yes, you can share, the Apple can share this age range. I mean, there's so much, and I run into parents all the time that are just almost, they just give up. Like, I mean, it's too much to have to manage. And I feel for that because it is a lot to get in, and there's a lot of customization options that you can do, I guess in a family account is what I generally call it here. And maybe this is an extra thing. I mean, this is a great little PDF that John links to here,
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
Apple, called "Helping Protect Kids Online." I mean, it's a nice read, but it's I don't know how many. It's only 8 pages, and it doesn't really give you like all the details necessarily on how to do it. It'll give you some of the, I guess, policies more than anything else. Anyway, I was just going to say, I'm glad that Apple has some of these accounts in there, but I just know it's so difficult to kind of help folks on that. And, every family's different, right? I mean, every family has a different way that they approach some of this on and make those decisions. But I'm glad that we are at least letting people know, like, if you're in that situation, in that season of life, it would be a great idea to kind of read through this at least a little bit and to, try to understand the best part. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one last thing, you talk about in that season of life, and I thought about these issues a lot when my kids were younger, and you wanted to protect them and stuff like that. This is a totally different topic, but it's related. Something that I've been starting to
Okay.
think about is, so what do you do when your kids get older? And I know that
Yeah.
parents face this in a million different ways. When do you make them pay for their own insurance? When do you make them pay for
Right.
their own cell phone bills? All this sort of stuff. But my kids are on my Apple Family Plan, which means,
Yeah.
for example, that my credit card is charged if they purchase an app or something like that. I have a son that's in college. He's almost 20 years old, and at some point he's going to want to, I guess at some point he might want the freedom of being on his own, but of course it also means he has
Right.
to pay for everything on his own. I
Right.
have not actually explored, and I know people must deal with this every day, when you transition someone off of being on a family plan to just being on their own.
Oh, great
Like, for
question.
example, every
Yeah.
app that he's gotten over the years that has been part of my account, is he going to still have access to that? Does he have to repurchase all those apps on his own?
Ooh.
I have not yet figured out, and in fact, I hope that somewhere online there is like a resource of, now your kid is in his 20s. What do you do? How do you
The
transition them
transition
off?
from
I have not explored that, and who knows? Maybe my kids will still be on my account when they're 40 years old. I have no idea, but it's just something I've thought about, and I don't. At some point, that transition is going to happen. They haven't asked for it, so I guess as long as they're not asking, I guess they're not asking for it because I'm paying for apps for them. But it's just something I think about sometimes.
Well, here is a topic that we, from time to time, will cover because it's even more important than the most important thing we were just talking about with kids. And that is, yes, you're welcome, all listeners. We're going to talk about the new emojis
The
coming
new
out
emoji.
in iOS 18.4. I know we cover this like every, maybe at least twice a year, something like that, where they come out with this. And I've done
Uh-huh.
a little bit of research into this and, the organization that oversees this, which is kind of weird and that it has all of this. But
Hmm.
these are official, the new emojis that are coming out on iOS 18.4. And finally, thank you goodness, we have a face with bags under eyes. We have a radish. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not a radish. It is a root vegetable emoji
Uh-huh.
and a shovel. So I just want everyone to know, like, finally, we are happy to, provide you this important news.
Exactly. Every year, this is one of these things that, the emojis that we have are pretty good. And so when they add to them every year, they seem to be a little bit more esoteric, a little bit less useful, but they can still be fun. You never know. Some of
It's
these might
there.
be,
Yeah.
that emoji face with the bags under his eyes. I have
Yes.
absolutely felt that way some mornings. And so sometimes that might be just the appropriate emoji that I want to use. So it's fun to see the
That's
new
good.
characters. If you're looking at the video version of this, you can see them. And if not, take a look at the link I had to Gadget Hacks. They have the pictures of them. They're going to be in iOS 18.4. This is interesting. We mention this every year. Apple uses adding new emoji as a way to convince people who haven't upgraded yet to upgrade. And so I
That's
always
right.
think it's interesting. Apple never comes out with the new emoji. They could, but they never come out with it in the 0.0 release, which is the one that comes out in September every year,
Yeah,
because they're still
you're
working out the
right.
bugs, right? And then so I always think it interesting, like if they put the new emoji in the 0.2, then that's sort of Apple's unofficial way of saying thumbs up to 0.2. This is the one that we're now
Okay.
ready
All
for.
right.
And so here we are. It's actually 0.4, which is going to come out next month in April. And so the fact that
Yeah.
Apple is waiting,
Interesting.
this is the one that Apple's saying, if you haven't updated yet, if you're still one of those laggards, the one thing that might get you to upgrade is having new emoji, because you don't want your friends to send you an emoji that you can't see what they're sending you. And so that's the little carrot that they offer. But it's also sort of interesting, because to me, that's Apple's way of saying, if you haven't updated yet, we're now ready to get, come on over to 18.4. This will be a good one. So
Especially if
other
you
than
want your
that,
root
though,
vegetable
if you want your root
emoji.
vegetable, the fingerprint emoji, the one that's sort of like a little what is that purple sort of smooth shape,
Like
whatever it
they call
is,
it a splatter, Jeff.
a
It's a splatter.
splatter.
And
Okay,
then
it's
of
a
course you
splatter.
have now the leafless tree. So
Hmm.
it's like it's almost like a Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones things there with the leafless tree, I guess. Interesting there. Okay, well, now we'll turn to something a little more serious. I promise, dear listeners. Another thing that's very important: security,
Yes.
specifically password security, and one of our all-time favorite apps. Not because it's something that we have gotten. As a gift or anything, but because it's something that we have been using for years and years. Both Jeff and I like 1Password, the 1Password app.
Hmm.
No matter what password app that you use, as long as you're using a password management app, is a good thing. But we have always enjoyed 1Password, and I like this little quick story from Juli Clover over at MacRumors today. You linked to, which is interesting. When I first read this, I was like, is it really necessary? But I'm going to start using it. You can assign locations now to some of your passwords, and I think you maybe had an example here, or maybe she put it in this story, to where if you go to a certain Starbucks, every time, that you can have certain sites that you log into when you sit at your Starbucks every morning or something like that, and you can assign a
Hmm.
location so that it bubbles up as a favorite there, which I just think that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, this feature just came out, and I'm still thinking about it, but it's definitely true that there are some passwords that I end up looking at on my iPhone or my computer,
Mm-hmm.
because I have 1Password, works on my Mac, my PC, my iPad, my
Yeah.
iPhone, even my Apple Watch. Um, there are some that, like, I'm more likely to look at when I'm at home or when I'm at work, or maybe a coffee shop. And so I have yet to think in my head how I'm going to use this, but I
Mm-hmm.
really like the idea of it, because that way you have quick and easy access to something that you're likely, something that you really often look at when you're in your office. And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a password. Remember, 1Password can store
Right.
all sorts of things. It can store your passports, for example, your driver's license, your secure notes, which are just like regular notes that are in the Notes app, but they're just a little bit more secure. And so if there's any little tidbit of information that you have in 1Password, be it a password or something else, and you're more likely to use that in a certain location, you can now make it even faster to get to it by now, it doesn't mean you can't access it anywhere just by searching for it, but it will surface to the top. So I think it's a really cool idea. And again, I wish I could offer a concrete example of how I'm using it, but I just saw that last night, and so I need to think about it. But I love the idea that they came up with this as an option. Apple has had location-based things. I mean, that this has been a
Yeah.
possibility for a while, right? Because you
Geolocation.
you can
Right.
have your geolocation, it knows where you are. You can have, for example, you can say, remind me when I get home to take out the trash or whatever it is. And then once your iPhone notices that you're home, it will give you that reminder. And so we've had these location-based things for a while, but this is a nice way to incorporate it into an app. So bravo to 1Password for coming out with a cool new feature. I like it.
I'll give you a quick example. I haven't done this yet because I just saw this as well. But on this little picture image that they're showing here as an example, they have something called office door codes. And I'll tell you, I go to Chicago maybe every other month or something like that, and I go to an office that has an office door code. And you know what I do every time that I go there, Jeff? I pull up, I put in that code in my regular notes app. And I didn't even think about that. Just like you said, I don't think of, 1Password, I store all kinds of things in there, but I have not stored this office code, door code in 1Password. And now I'm like, kicking myself. Why am I not doing that? Because that's exactly what I could do. When it knows that I'm next to that office building, it will pull up or bubble this up in the 1Password app, and then I can just pop it as opposed to unlocking my phone and, going. Yeah. So that's a good example there on that. If you want to know more about 1Password or talk to us specifically about 1Password and so many other apps, may we invite you to think about a month from almost today, in about a month. It's a conference. It is specifically for lawyers and legal professionals, but it is a place that Jeff and I have known each other for many, many years because we presented at it. It is the ABA Tech Show. See, the American Bar Association has a technology conference every year, and this year it is happening April 2nd through the 5th. So you can tell it's just about a month away now. But Jeff and I are both going to be doing some presentations. Mine, I will tell you, I have been doing a presentation with Tara Cheever from Lit Software. So Jeff and I are big fans of you just mentioned the Transcript Pad app a little bit earlier, Jeff, but Trial Pad app, as well as they just came out with a brand new Timeline Pad app, which looks amazing. And we are going to be talking about that. So Tara and I do a little series called Trial with an iPad. We actually have parts 1 and 2. And we've been doing this for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's great because we go into all of the detail about how to use that, how to juggle those different apps. You've got 2 sessions that you're going to be presenting at the ABA Tech Show as well, Jeff. What are those? I'm pretty excited.
I'm super excited about the ones that I'm doing. I have one that's something, I have been going to Tech Show and speaking at Tech Show for a long time. I think my first one was after Hurricane Katrina was in 2005. And I did a session I can't remember if it was 2006 or 2007. I think it was 2006 about, preparing for disaster recovery, because that was obviously a hot topic back then. And that was, almost 20 years ago. And, but since then, and that was even before I had iPhone JD, for example, a very long time ago.
Right.
But ever since I've had iPhone JD in 2007, I have frequently done sessions that talk about iPhones, iPads, stuff like that. But I haven't done one in a number of years. I don't know, 5 years, maybe. It's been a little while. And so one of my sessions is going to be called Maximizing Your Productivity with an iPad or iPhone, which is a fancy way of saying every tip I can think of that's you should be doing today. If you have an iPad or an iPhone, and I'm sure everybody listening to this does, if you're a lawyer, I'm going to pack everything I can come up with into that 1 hour. And I'm so excited about this presentation. It's going to be great fun.
I've seen your tips, and I am also very, very excited, my friend.
That one's going to be awesome. But the other one I'm doing is even more cool because this is something brand new. The session is called Practicing Law in an Augmented Reality. And AKA the Apple Vision Pro session. But so we're going to talk specifically, when I say we, it's me and Kenton Bryce, who is a law professor at the University of, I think, Oklahoma Law School. Super nice guy. Yep. I met him many years ago at Tech Show. In fact, he went to a dinner that you and I hosted. That's when I first met him in person. And so I've known him since then. He is super smart. I mean, he lives and breathes this stuff. He teaches young lawyers how to use technology to its best. And he is so bright and so cutting edge, which I love. So we're going to be talking specifically about the Apple Vision Pro. And so if you own an Apple Vision Pro, and you definitely want to go to the session because we're going to have lots of tips. But we're also sort of talking about, the other half of the presentation is sort of the future, because I realize the Apple Vision Pro, it's too expensive and not many people have it yet, but it definitely is the future. And the things that are in the Apple Vision Pro now are going to be a big deal as new versions of the technology come out that are cheaper and that are lighter and better. And so we're going to start to talk about what this sort of means for the law and how lawyers could be using it, and why you, as a lawyer who tries to be on the forefront, should be thinking about these things. And, it's not unlike when the first iPhone came out, when the first iPad came out. Actually, a better analogy is the first Apple Watch. I love my Apple Watch, but when that first Apple Watch came out in 2015, I think was the date, it was so basic. It was so slow. but it was full of
Yeah.
potential. It really had
Yeah.
the opportunity to do so much. And the Apple Watch today is so much more useful to my everyday life, including my law practice and my personal, fitness and everything else. And so I think the Vision Pro is the same way. It's at this early stage, but full of potential. So that's going to be super exciting. I cannot wait for that session. And if you go to Tech Show, in the past, Brett, you and I have often sponsored a dinner called Taste of Tech Show. We're trying to work
Yeah.
that out. I'm hoping that that's going to work out. And if so, look out for that, because you're going to, those the signups for that go fast, because we usually only have, like, I don't know what it is, 10 people with this or something.
Yeah.
And so, and
Yes.
I've met
Right.
so many fantastic people from across the country, across the world, really. We've had people from other countries join us too. And so, anyway, if you want to hang out with me and Brett and hear some cool topics, not only
Yeah.
the ones that we're talking about, but a million more, join us in Chicago next month. It's going to be great
You
fun.
can hear how excited Jeff is. That's what. So anyway, we'll put this in. You can go to techshow.com, just like it sounds, and you can look around. You can sign up, get more information about it. It's April the 2nd through the 5th. And I think both of our sessions, Jeff, is in that Thursday and Friday of Tech Show. So you can look at all the schedule and get all the information. And when it is available, I hope that Taste of Tech Show dinner will be available there, and you can get some more information. So anyway, thanks for letting us talk about that. I remember that one of those first dinners you had, it was like micro cloths that had the iPhone JD logo on it, Jeff, and you were giving those out. Now, I'm not promising you're going to get any kind of iPhone JD swag this time, but but that was fun, and that was just like, those are good memories on being able to do all of that. So that's fantastic. If you are in the mood to watch a little bit of national hockey, the National Hockey League, I thought this was just really cool. You don't link to ESPN.com very often, Jeff, but this one you did, because the referees are going to be using Apple Watches for the haptic indicators. I think I was reading this right? Instead of being able to look around over at the penalty box or look at the bench to come off, they have to glance around it so much while they're skating at high speed, trying not to run into players. But this is so cool that the Apple Watch, some of the haptic feedback apparently is going to give them an idea of some of the other actions going on the ice, so they don't have to look around. Was that accurate in how they're going to be using that?
Yeah, and it's so cool. I mean, I've obviously never been a referee for a hockey game before, but
Right.
they're pointing out that, like, things like you say are moving so fast, and they need to keep an eye on the clock, not only to know, how much time is left, but also because when people come off the penalty bench and stuff like that. And
Right.
so, but if you're looking at the clock, and as one of the referees quoted in this article said, every stadium arena is a little different, and so you might be looking left when you should be looking right. He's like, and that can distract you from seeing what's going on and doing your job. And so
That's so
what they
cool.
have is this technology with the Apple Watch that, for example, for timers, through haptic feedback and also just being able to glance at their watch and see the time on there, which they always know you always know where your wrist is to look at that. It's just a faster way for them to have that data. So that's really cool. And it's a specialized app. But something I thought was really interesting is there's a paragraph in this article. It says, this is fascinating. It says, the watches, if you have this special app, it pulls 25 data points from the NHL's Oasis feed, which is part of the
Oh
league's
my.
edge, puck, and player tracking system. And it says pulling the data this way, rather than using traditional push notifications, like, how your Apple Watch will
Right.
often just get a push notification of, like, an alert. Because they have this special system that picks up the 25 data points around the actual rink, it dramatically decreases the lag between what's happening on the ice and what's delivered to the watch. And so instead of
Oh.
relying on an arena or stadium Wi-Fi, they're using cellular connectivity. So it's neat to me that this is not
Okay.
just, not only is this an app that's specialized, but it's using special hardware, so that the notifications happen instantly. Because, we've all known that there's sometimes a very slight delay in a notification. Sometimes my
Right. Right.
phone will notify something before my watch and everything else. But when you're in a split second situation, like, a live game, you don't want any of that. And so I just thought this was fascinating that they're investing this technology. I think it's really, really cool. So it's just neat use of tech that will hopefully mean that the refs can do their job even better in a way that they can be more precise. People will have less reason to complain about the referee, perhaps, but it's a really cool use of technology that I thought was fun to read about.
That really could have been a "Where You At" segment. on
Almost,
that,
yeah.
just because that's it's tracking things going on. How about an in the vision segment, just real quick? You mentioned how you're going to be talking about this at ABA Tech Show. This was really interesting. With the Apple Vision, there is a new app for the iPhone related to the Apple Vision Pro. But then if you download and install the new Vision OS 2.4 Beta 2, there's a new app in there. I think it's called Spatial Gallery. And it sounds like you've already tried this out, Jeff.
Yeah, so I talked about this last week because we knew that it was going to come out.
Right.
I updated. I told my Vision Pro install the betas, and so once you do that little switch, then you can download the beta versions. And so I've used 18.4. Again, I don't use betas on my iPhone or iPad because they sometimes make them crash or slow, and those devices are so mission critical. My Vision Pro, on the other hand, it's just something I'm using for fun right now, sometimes for work, but not as much. So I don't mind using a beta on it to try it. So I was looking at the app, and it's an interesting app. It's there's not much content in there right now, but it's obviously just, this is the very, 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 very first version of it. It's going to get better in the future. And so the idea is that you have a single app that you can have a lot of your spatial content in. This is not the immersive thing. This is not like these immersive videos that we talk about Apple coming out with, where, you feel like you're right there, in the hot air balloon or in the Arctic or something like that. And you can look around with your eyes and see things 180 degrees. These are, it is in like a rectangle picture frame or a square frame. So I can use my iPhone or my Vision Pro to take a video that's 3D or take a photo that's 3D, and I'm going to see it. Like I can move it close to me, but it's not completely immersive. You can definitely see the square, but it is 3D, like watching a 3D movie. And so sometimes when I take pictures and when I think about it, I'll be like, oh, I'm going to actually also take a spatial picture or a spatial video. I did that when we had like the snow in New Orleans a few weeks ago, because it was just such a bizarre once every 100+ years things. And I was watching it the other day, and there's more realism when you're looking at a video that's spatial, because as you're moving around and trees are coming in close, you feel more like you're there. Not completely immersive, but it's cool. But in addition to the spatial content that I myself have recorded, I would love to see more of cool things that other people record. And that's the promise of this app, is that people that are a lot smarter than me, better photographers and stuff like that, they may create something with their iPhone or even higher end equipment that they can share. And so this, if you use the app in the beta like I have, it maybe has a dozen things that you can look at. Some of them are videos. Some of them are just stills. For example, some of the Apple TV, Apple, like you're showing some of them right now, you're showing a 2D version of them. But like if you watch the show Shrinking, or there was another one that they had there, Severance, of course. It's just a picture, but it's a 3D picture. So like it's like a still frame that if you just look at it the way that you're looking at it right now, Brett, on your computer monitor, it's like whatever, that's just a picture.
Yeah, it's not a big deal,
when you're wearing a Vision Pro, you can sort of, because it's 3D picture, it just gives it more depth. It gives it just a little more. I mean, again, it's not mind blowing. You're not going to look at it more than 10, 15 seconds, but it's sort of cool. And I would love the idea of having a steady stream of this spatial content. And that's what this app allows for. So anyway, it's cool. I've talked about it too much. It's fun to have. I look forward to it coming out for real in April, and it's in the beta right now.
Right. Very good. Let's do a quick in the show segment. I look forward to Fridays now every single week. Not only because I get to talk to you every week, but now because I know at the end of the day, I get to watch the next episode of Severance. I'm so looking for. Last week was so amazing what they were doing, and today you just linked to a quick little video with Ben Stiller, who is, I guess he's the all-around producer, right? The executive producer of Severance. I mean, it really is sort of his brainchild, is what I've kind of gathered here. But he was on Jimmy Kimmel Live and talking about it, and everybody. I one little scene that I remember that Jimmy Kimmel was asking, like, Ben, when you go to like cocktail parties, does everybody ask you like, how is it going to end? How is it going to end? And Ben was like, you really don't want to know how it ends, right? I mean, nobody really wants to know. They want to go through the entire adventure, but he knows, obviously. At least I think he knows. But anyway, I'm just like, I don't think I do want to know, but I really want to watch the next episode. Like, I'm ready now. Put them all out.
It was fun to hear Ben Stiller talk about the show. I like the idea, though, that he confirmed that he absolutely has an end. The stereotypical example of this is the show that we all loved watching. What was it, 20+ years ago, was Lost, which was such a great show. And yet the ending of Lost is controversial because, although I thought it was okay, some people felt like that show didn't exactly know where it was going. And it had a great premise, and it sort of felt sometimes in later seasons like they were making it up as they went along. And so Ben Stiller, I still watched it, don't get me wrong. But anyway, Ben Stiller says, oh no, we absolutely have an ending in mind. We have we know how we're getting there. We know what we're doing. We know how many seasons we want to do. And since this is such a popular show, I'm sure Apple's going to give them all the seasons that they want. And so it's good to know that there was a specific plan. And he talks about that. I don't want to know what it is. No spoilers, but I love that he knows what it is. And then, of course, the other fun thing about the interview, and I won't say too much about it, except that you can't help but see it when you look at all of the headlines, is that he had a role in mind for former President Barack Obama in Severance. And I won't say more than that. You can once you've watched the show and you listen to the interview, you'll get more details. And once I hear him explain it, I'm like, you know what? I think that would have been pretty cool if he had done that, but I obviously understand he didn't want to do it, I suppose. But it's still cool that it was a possibility. So that's one fun thing. I will say one more thing. You mentioned last week, and again, no spoilers, but last week's episode looked different than any episode of the show so far. And there was a reason for it because of the topic of the show, but there was also a reason because of the way that they filmed it. And I'm embarrassed I don't have her name in front of me, but the person that's the director of photography, I think I have that right.
Cinematography, right.
Cinematography. She had never really...
I'll look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, she had never directed a show before, and Ben Stiller gave an opportunity to be the director on this episode, and she did all of these really interesting things. So much of Severance, the look of it is it's sort of cold, it's a little blue tint, it gives you that sort of weird feeling, but they wanted it because of the topics explored last week. They wanted it to look different, and so you have bright colors. It's the first time you see green trees, and she even made the decision to use film as opposed to digital for filming one part of it, which gives it this softer, more personal look. It was a stunning episode. And so as excited as I am to watch tonight's new episode, there's her name. Yeah. Jessica Lee Gagne, how you pronounce it. But I mean, I just give her nothing but claps.
Absolutely.
I actually think
so good.
I think I'm going to go back and watch last week's episode one more time, just because it was so good. And I feel like I may have missed it. And I just want to experience it because it was so beautiful. And so I'm going to probably have to watch last week's episode one more time. And then I will watch the new episode this week. The new one. Fun. Yeah.
One other thing, I know we've talked about this, a new movie that came out. I guess it was released last week, right? Called The Gorge. And I loved it because to me, I kind of like these post-apocalyptic, science fiction type things. But I loved how you described it here, that it's a perfect show for a date night because it has action, but it also has romance. And I'm like, can I just get the action and cut the romance part out? But anyway, apparently it goes with a good story here. A lot of people have been liking this movie.
You haven't seen it yet, have you?
I have not. No,
okay.
I haven't. You watched it, apparently.
Yeah. When it first came out, the thing that I noticed is that one of the two stars of it is Anya Taylor-Joy, who I know from The Queen's Gambit, which was an amazing Netflix show.
Yeah.
And I know she's done other stuff too, but that's the only thing I knew her from. She has a very distinctive look to her, sort of larger eyeballs. She's an amazing actor. In fact, she used to be, if I remember correctly, I think she used to be like a ballerina or something like that. And so she, which is great if you're in an action movie, because it means that you can move your body in all sorts of different ways. And this is a really, really fun sort of spy sort of thing. It's when the previews came out for this, I thought to myself, this could be good. And so I watched it earlier this week. I think it came out a couple weeks ago. But it's fun. I mean, again, this is not not the greatest movie ever. Fun. But I really enjoyed it. It's got a lot of action. It's got a lot of sort of edge of your seat. And I will say one thing, and this is not a spoiler, but one of the things that I was a little apprehensive about watching it is I knew from the preview that there was a certain aspect of the movie that had a little bit of a horror sort of tinge to it, like gross things and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm not a huge horror person. I don't want, things that are disgusting and things that are jumping in my face and trying to jump scare me. There is a tiny bit of that in here, but it's not so much that you need to be, it's not like, you have to be a fan of the Halloween series or the Friday the 13th series. It's totally fine. It's just a little bit of it, but it's a lot of action, a lot of adventures. It's got Sigourney Weaver. I mean, Sigourney Weaver's awesome, and she's awesome in this. I
didn't know she was in that. Okay, yeah. They didn't put that in the trailer, I don't think. I don't remember.
It's fun. She has a smaller but very important role in it, and it's a great fun. So I will say, if you're just looking for a fun movie to watch. It's got some action. It's got some romance. It's keep you on the edge of your seats. It's
And
a
some
fun
horror,
2
apparently.
hours
It's
and a
got a little
tiny
bit of
bit.
everything in it.
I when the previews came out months ago, I had high hopes, and when I watched it this week, I was like, that was awesome. I really enjoyed it. So good watch.
Last little thing, typically I see inflatable tube people at like used car dealerships. I've never seen one used to advertise an iPhone. And it sounds like from the way that you described it today, Jeff, you have not either. You said that this video is just bizarre. This is a new video that Apple put out to meet the iPhone 16e. I think it's kind of artistic from what they do, but I kind of left scratching my head after watching this little video myself.
For 3 weeks now, you and I have talked about the iPhone 16e, and we've said, should we talk about what it takes away from the 16? Should we talk about what it adds from the SE? What do you focus on? Who is it for? Apparently, we're not the only ones a little confused on how to describe the 16e, because when Apple gave it to their crack marketing team, they came out with this video that makes me go, huh? Okay. So it's interesting to watch. I guess if you watch this, I don't know that you'll be all that more educated on what the 16e gives you,
Right.
but it is eye-catching. So I on the one hand, I'm scratching my head. On the other hand, here I am talking about it. So I guess it did some, as long as you're talking about it, that's what they want. So it's
just, I think this is the same team that came out with that. I mean, so many beautiful commercials. The one where the dad had loss of hearing and it was like using the eye.
Gracious,
I mean, come on, like, can't you've got to somehow, but like you said, we're talking about it. So maybe they accomplished their task on some of that, but I just thought that was hilarious the way that you put that. So anyway, have fun watching that little weird video. And if you like inflatable tube people dancing to people, you'll enjoy this video.
You're going to love this one. Yeah.
In the know. Jeff, since we talked about 1Password quickly, we could give a couple of our favorite 1Password tips.
Awesome.
Now, this one is really almost silly, stupid, I would almost have to say, but I'm thrilled that I found this one gentleman. He's a programmer in the UK, Alex W.L. Chan, this programmer who does a really good job of explaining exactly the way that I use the notes field in 1Password. And Alex does the same thing here in that he explained it. Now, I'm not talking about Secure Notes, which is a whole other little tool that you can use in 1Password, and I use Secure Notes. But when I set up a new account for, like, let's say a bank or a new store online, I will go in and create that login in 1Password. But inside that little editable password, you have a whole panel there that you can add things like if you need to add a pin, you can add, all kinds of information about that, like a website. I always put the website in so I know how to get there, because sometimes the login URL is a little bit different than just, the main page. Right, so sometimes I'll put that in. But what I always inevitably do, and it's almost just a no-brainer for me, there's a little note field in that password account, as you were, that little panel there. And I always go in and I put in the date and I put in a little note as to why I created this account, or, if there is like some kind of an aspect, like if I have to change a password, for example, I'll go into that field and I'll put in the date when I had to change it because it expired, or because I thought that it was compromised in somehow. I hope some of that makes sense. Alex W.L. Chan here on the website does a great job of going through, update it if he needs to update the email address or change it, or if he needs to add authentication methods like passkeys. In other words, it's a great way to go back, and I've had to do this several times, and I'm just thankful that I do capture something about that in that notes field as to, like, when I changed something, when I created it, because it just gives me a kind of a running list of things. In fact, I'll even tell you this. In some cases, if I have to change the password, sometimes I get a little bit nervous when I change a password, like, is it going to take? Is it not going to take? I'll copy the old password and paste it into the notes field just so that I can have a record of, like, this is the old one that even though it's a bunch of gibberish, but I just like to have that running kind of a chronology of, like, what is happening with that account. I hope some of that makes sense. People I find when they set up they just put in their email and their password, and then they go on, and that's fine. It's not a problem to use it that way, but it's really nice to be able to go back and kind of see that little historical, archive of what you did, if you've ever had to change something. Many times if a website changes their authentication method, or they all of a sudden require you to have multi-factor authentication, well, I'll put that in there, right? There's a whole other little field that you can actually put in a PIN or a passcode if you need to. But I just like to write that down and say, I created it then. I got so many times, it's just been a good place for me to go back and look at what something had changed. So if I need to call the account or the website of the store or something, I can just tell them, well, I changed it this date, or, that kind of a thing. One other thing quickly, there's other fields in there for like security questions, but oftentimes I'll put in the notes field, I'll put in, this was asking me like this kind of a question, and here's the answer. Because sometimes accounts will require you to have 3 security questions, right? And you can put that in separate fields, but sometimes I just put that all in the notes so I can read it and keep track of that. Because sometimes you have to change those security questions, right? So I like to keep track of like the old ones that I did before. Anyway, hope that makes sense. 1Password, use it for all of your password accounts, but just take note of that little notes field. And, a lot of times I'll just put in the date and a little reference of what happened then. And that's been very helpful for me.
Yeah, I like that 1Password is sophisticated enough that you can add whatever field you want. And so, like you say, if there's something very special, like a special kind of pin, I can add a field called this special kind of pin, whatever it is, and then put what the pin it is. But that takes a little bit more time. If you just want a quick and easy place to jot it down, put it in notes. I will say one thing, you made the reference to keeping track of when you changed passwords, stuff like that. You don't have to use notes for that.
That's right.
Every single item in 1Password, if you're looking at it, it will tell you at the bottom when it was last modified and when it was originally created. Like I'm looking at a note right now that I can see was last modified just a few weeks ago, but it was actually created 10 years ago in 2015. But additionally, if you're looking at any password entry that has a password. So for example, here's one of my apps that I have my password. Right next to my password, there is the circle with the 3 dots. And if I tap on the circle with the 3 dots, the last choice is called View Password History. And 1Password actually will give me the date and the passwords. So if I need that password that I used 2 or 3 generations ago, there's actually a way to get to it there. And I love the fact that the app keeps it, keeps that record, because sometimes like I get a little nervous, like I'm changing my password on the website and this is what it's going to be, but then something happens and like it didn't work. And I'm like, oh my God, what was the last password?
Exactly.
I have the security of knowing that that's still in 1Password because it has generations going all the way back. So I love that about it. The way that you can customize the individual fields is so fantastic. And then the fact that there's that notes at the end that you could just put whatever you want, I love. So that's a great tip. Here is my tip. So your tip has to do with you're looking at a specific entry. My tip has to do with when you're just opening up the app. And this relates to what we talked about a few minutes ago, this brand new thing that 1Password has of showing you the location related passwords. So one of the things I love about the app is you can open up 1Password, you can type, you can hit search, and you can type in whatever name you're looking for, and you're going to find your entry. And that's totally fine. But sometimes I really just want to get at something faster. And so for the things that I use most often, I just want them to be right there when I open up the home screen. And so here's 2 sort of related tips. One of them is when you're looking at the home screen in 1Password, at the very top, there's a little icon for settings. It's got like a little line with the it's a settings icon. It's obvious. If I tap on that, I can customize. This is a relatively new feature, came out in the last couple of years. I can customize the home screen to decide what order I want things. And so what I have at the top is called pinned fields. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then you could put other things too, like tips, favorites, frequently created. I like having favorites near the top because those are the ones that I use most often. And so they're always just there. I can just one tap to get to my entry. But another one that I also like to have right just below favorites is recently created and then frequently used, because I might not call something a favorite, but frankly, if I use it all the time, 1Password knows that, and so it will put it in a list of frequently used. Or one of the times that I'm often most likely to use a password is if it's something that I created very recently and I want to go back to it again. And so I have moved those fields further to the top. And then there's other fields that I have a little bit more to the bottom. And so you can customize what's most important. so that's like my sub tip. Here's my
Yeah,
real
that's
tip.
great.
The one that I have at the very, very top
Here
is
it is.
called
Yeah.
pinned fields. And I loved
Yeah.
pinned fields because pinned fields says, I'm not just going to give you a link to the card that has all the information, username,
Right.
password, one-time password, modification history, but sometimes it's just one part of the entry is what you always want. Like, for example, my Apple ID password. It's one of those things that I often have to type in,
That's a great
and
question. Yeah,
I
that's
don't
a
need the
great
other
point.
things. I know what my username, but I just want that one password, that one part of the entry is what I want. And so I can pin that specific subpart of the entry to the top and it's there. Or another one is like a pin code that I use all the time. I want that
Yep.
pinned, so to speak, pin my pin at the very top. Another one that I have up there is I use Google Voice as an alternative phone number that sometimes I'll give to people if I don't really want them calling me. And so they have a number to call, and I have the ringer turned off. So if somebody calls my Google Voice, they go straight to voicemail. And so, but I get those voicemails, and sometimes I need to share with somebody what my Google Voice
Right.
number is. So I have a card called Google Voice that's got all my account information and my password and the phone number, but that one field that has my Google Voice phone number, 504 dash whatever the number is, I have just that one specific thing pinned to the top. And so that way, when I look at the home screen, I have instant access to that thing that I use most often. So my tip is use pin fields if there are specific numbers or password, like specific entries that you want. And then
Right.
secondarily, use favorites and use frequently, make that order, whatever makes the most sense for you. And when you do all of this, you take just a little care and time to do it. My 1Password app becomes infinitely more useful. Sometimes I do open the app and
Yeah.
search for a password, but 80% of the time, what I'm looking for is right there in front of me on the home
Right.
screen, so fast to get. And of course, often I don't even have to look it up. I mean, the beautiful thing of 1Password is on my computer, on my iPhone, when I'm logging into a website, for example, it can often do all that stuff for me. So I don't even have to open up the app. But for those situations when you do need to open the app, those tips make it useful. And one thing that should become clear from the discussion, we talked, I guess it was last fall when Apple released its Passwords app. I love that Apple has a free built-in password manager because everybody should be using a password manager. So it's nice that
Yes.
Apple gives you one for free.
Great
But
point. Yeah.
all of these advanced features that you and I are talking about, notes things, moving around fields, pinning things, settings,
Right.
secure notes, this is an example of why a third-party app, and I like 1Password, but I know there's other ones too, LastPass and other ones. A third-party app can give you so much more.
Yeah.
So if you're not using any password manager, for goodness sakes, at least use the free one. But when you're ready to take it to the next level, this is great. And we haven't even talked about things like sharing passwords with family members and all.
Oh my
I know this is
goodness.
sounding like a commercial, but there's a lot. It's great.
It's so good. And by the way, just getting back to, full circle, when I went in to customize my home screen, everything you were just talking about, this was the first time that I had updated the app with that new it's called the nearby. I had to go in and say I want to add the nearby
Right. You turn it
card on
on.
my home, and then it did say allow location access because you have to do that to do it. So I'm
Right.
just letting people know. And then I like this. You can even say noting nearby, you can have a distance on there. Like, do you want it within 50 feet of a location
I
or
saw
500
that.
feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. We'll play with this a little bit more and see what to do. But anyway, no question. We're pretty big fans of 1Password, and even just listening to you, I'm like rearranging some of my home screen here, and it just really makes it so infinitely more helpful on some of that. Now with that nearby, and I just pinned a couple of other things here that I just love doing that because it's so easy, and you just simply tap it right to copy it, and then you can paste it into something else. Just really, really cool. Yeah. Not sponsored, by the way, yet. But hey, 1Password, we're here for you, man. You can tell we like you guys. Ooh, lots. And thanks everyone for listening, as always. And truly, if you want some more information, like I said, we already talked about, Jeff and I will be at the ABA Tech Show in a month together. We'd love to come up. We'd love to talk with you. I know several conferences that I've gone to, Jeff, people have come up and just really told us how much they enjoy listening. And we just so much appreciate that and enjoy. Happy to talk with you, answer any questions. So thanks as always, Jeff. And we'll talk with you next week about this week's episode of Severance. Thanks, everyone. Talk with you next week, Jeff.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.